Great.
Okay.
Good to go?
Yeah, over to
All
you,
right.
Jen.
Yeah. Just want to take a minute and kind of give us a chance to be here and just appreciate each other's presence and in the comfort of our own space. Um, Hi, Beth.
Hello.
Um, Creating, we're just going to go ahead and start and just let people join us. But just knowing that we'll be muting everyone except for Fiona and I as we record this. In the first hour, Fiona and I will be discussing sections of her book, and what we want to do is create a kind of a virtual a table. We want to set a table for a meal, and we're going to set that table through the words of the book and just do that kind of dialoguing together, and that will be recorded. And in the second hour, we would like for you all to partake in the meal that we've laid out for you. And we're not going to record that so that you all have confidentiality and feel free to share as you want to. And we feel like this format will set the tone for this incredible book that we're here to celebrate, and then also let you all bring your insights and wisdom and questions and ideas to Fiona, so that we kind of co-create a space, a really special space in these 2 hours. So that's kind of our goal. And just to introduce myself, my name is Jen Pierre-Rich. I am a writer. I am, let's see, what am I today? I always feel weird when I try to introduce myself because I think, what am I today? I'm a weirdo today. Been thinking a lot about myself lately. I am a researcher doing my dissertation on my subject matter is ecological consciousness, but I am doing an autoethnography in which I'm looking at myself and exploring how ecological consciousness kind of faded away in me and how I reclaimed that through my own dark night experience. So I've been writing about that really intensely for the last few months. So all I can really do is to describe myself is say that I really think I'm weird and strange and wonderful. And I feel really honored to share this space with Fiona, who, let me briefly introduce you all. I feel like you all probably know Fiona well, but I'm gonna go ahead and just briefly introduce her. She is a facilitator and teacher of embodied inquiry who has been exploring the mystical realm for many years, a creative and perceptive soul friend. She supports people from around the world to reconnect with and deepen into their real selves. She is the author of The Art of Finding Yourself, Living Bravely and Awaken to Your True Nature. She loves acting, is an occasional poet, and lives in Nottingham, UK. And Fiona and I are friends. We're old friends. We're ancient friends, in fact, even though we've really only actually in real life known each other since the spring of last year. But the truth is we're old friends because we meet each other in presence. And in presence, what you're all feeling right now, this vibration that we're creating in the moment, you know, we connect with each other on a really ancient level that goes beyond the friendship of individualism, right? Individualism would tell us that, oh, we're friends because Jen's a writer, Fiona's a writer, and you know they're working on a book, and maybe we have some competition about, you know, who's a better writer. That's how, you know, individualism would have us be friends. And then in the collective perspective, maybe we would be friends because we might like suffocate ourselves in our sameness. We might meet each other in friendship and be just like, oh, we've had the most amazing same experience. But that's not how we meet. We meet each other as what I and other theorists called as trans individuals. And a trans individual is someone who can move between the poles of the individuated self and the collective self in ways that are healthy and generative. And when you have a friendship with someone that's on that level, it's really quite a different thing than I've ever experienced in my life. And so we come to share this book as friends, as ancient friends in presence. And we hope that by opening the book and talking about sections from it, that you will feel our invitation to friendship, and you too will feel yourself as a friend of ours in this experience. So Fiona, feel free to chime in and share.
Thanks, Jen. I love what you say about that level of friendship. And in fact, just to say, this is only the second time we've spoken online, right? I mean, we've
Yeah.
had some emails and shared one time in conversation. You know, one of one of the phrases that I use in the book, which I really love, is that Gaelic phrase "anam cara," meaning soul friend on the level that you just described. And I think that's the kind of, when we're in the dark night, that's the kind of connection that we need and we want, and that often we're seeking. And in my experience, that was really difficult to find
Mm.
when I was right in it. So that was certainly one of the motivations for writing the book, was to get a book out there that's written from the perspective of a soul friend, of an anam cara, somebody else who's just been through it, not as a teacher, you know, not from not from any particular perspective other than somebody who's walking alongside.
Mm. Yeah. And we don't talk about it. You know, we don't talk about the dark night. And it's weird that we don't talk about it, because so many of us are experiencing it. And I wonder if you have thoughts on, you know, why we don't talk about, I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons why we don't talk about it, but I hope that, you know, what our project here today is normalizing that dark night. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. I think immediately there's a couple of things that spring to mind as you ask that. I think one is shame. You know, in my experience, there was a huge amount of shame, because often the dark night feels like the complete failure of our notion of who we're supposed to be, doesn't it? It feels like complete failure in terms of reaching our what's often called the ego ideal, you know, that sense of who we think we should be.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, and I know for other people that I've spoken to about this shame is that the shame and sense of failure is so crippling that it's difficult to allow ourselves to speak of that when we're in the middle of it.
Mm.
And I think the other thing about it is that it's deeply, deeply countercultural. You know, it almost every imperative and urge that comes when we're in the dark night goes against the grain of who we're supposed to be in the societies that we live in, that most of us here live in. You know, so that pull into the darkness when everything around us is blaring light in different ways, even, you know, modern spirituality, you know, that pull into quiet and stillness when everything around us is telling us that we should be moving and driving and going forward and reaching excellence and all this sort of stuff that we're surrounded by. So I think to even open up the conversation in public, to even start to talk about this is crossing into some taboos in a way. And as you know, as I say in the book, this is an aspect of life that is minimized, denied, and often misunderstood. And who wants to try and talk about something when they're going to be denied, minimized, or misunderstood, right? I
Right.
mean, it's
Right.
that was certainly my experience when I was in it, and I still see a lot of that around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Everything in society tells us that we should know who we are, that we should be firm in who we are, that we should have a dependable identity structure. And yet that dependable identity structure, we've deep down inside we know it's false. You know, you point to that repeatedly in the book, that there's something inside that knows that this mask I'm wearing is false. and
Yeah.
and and so we're caught between these tensions of wanting to take off the mask and a society that's telling you, you better keep that mask on, because if you take it off, you'll be ostracized, you'll be called crazy, and so what incentive is there, you know who's doing this work other than those of us who are forced to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important to say that nobody comes here willingly on some level, isn't it? And we've got this dual thing going on, in the sense that there's something in us, like you say, knows that the mask isn't who we are. And I think there's a real longing to truth, to realness,
Mm.
to the realness of ourselves. And obviously, as you say, we've got that counterpole that says, like, do not take off the mask. As we know, the functioning of our current political and societal structures depend on everybody keeping the mask on,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much, don't they? And I think inwardly too, my sense of it was that I was terrified of what would happen when the mask came off. That the whatever, my sense was that whatever was behind the mask was so unacceptable, so messy, hideous, shameful, that to take it off would be catastrophic.
And it is.
Yeah, but interestingly, not in the way that we
Yeah,
imagine it will be
right,
before it's off, isn't it? I mean, I
right.
think that's the interesting thing, isn't it? We
Yeah,
we imagine we imagine catastrophe, but we don't get the catastrophe we've imagined, in a way, do we?
yeah,
And what's
yeah.
your sense of the catastrophic nature of it?
Um, well, for me, that awakening, that dark night experience was just, it was really the first time that I was really alone. And that was terrifying. And really alone with myself, my thoughts, my body. And that was, I think the aloneness was the most catastrophic part of it for me. It was just devastating because I had surrounded myself with so many images and stories and people that had affirmed my false sense of self throughout my life, my stories, that to be without that, it was, you talk about in the book, it is it's courting death. It is a dying. There
Yeah,
is, what is dying is that false sense of self. And um and so to willingly walk into that is goes against everything. I mean, you're walking into your own annihilation. Who does that?
yeah, yeah,
you know
absolutely.
but there's something deep down, of course, that's churning, right? There's something there that knows that you're going towards something, away from something that feels not, that feels false, an imposter, towards something that feels true. But if you go there, you'll die.
Yes, exactly, and that's the dilemma that we're completely caught on, isn't it? For I think the most intense part of the Dark Night
Yeah.
is exactly that dilemma. And I think we know on some level that the mask is deadened. I mean, the mask can only exist if we've deadened parts of ourselves, isn't it? And I had a sense of that as I came into the Dark Night, in a way that I'd never connected with before. This saying, I'm so numbed, I'm so deadened. And so I think that we want the realness, because aliveness is in the realness, isn't it? We know
Yeah.
that there's a vibrancy and an awakeness and aliveness in the realness. And as you say, at the same time, moving towards that absolutely spells what we think will be our end.
Yes. And we never really have lost that. That's the spark, right? The spark that we
Yeah,
feel, the thing that drives us, is that thing that I knew as a little girl I knew that wholeness. I knew myself. I knew who I was. I knew what I wanted. I knew to speak from my voice and say what I wanted, right? I was a baby. I knew how to vocalize what I wanted. And somehow through conditioning, through, all of those trauma, everything gets stripped away, but it's that core of knowing is still there. And I think you point to it as trust
Yes.
a lot in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things that is most devastating in a way, isn't it? Because we know what we've lost contact with. As you say, we know that aliveness because we all had it. And I think for me, I was grief stricken at the sense that I might not be able to reconnect with that again. That somehow I knew the loss and the missing of that. And I think we all do. I think that's what, that longing takes us into all kinds of things, both healthy and unhealthy in terms of behaviors and seeking and all of that. And I think there's a very wise intelligence movement in that. I think on some level we know what we've lost and it's natural to seek for it. My sense is often we look in the wrong places,
Yeah.
but that's an innocent misunderstanding until we find ourselves here.
Well, typically we look in the wrong places, and those wrong places are where the false identities are playing. And so the wrong
Yeah,
places we go to are where all of those sort of false identities that we're carrying that will feed that, right? So we're looking in all of these, oh, I'll go become a spiritual guru and I'll meditate and I'll become perfect in my enlightenment, right? That's the
yeah.
false place we go, because I have an image of that perfect, person that I think I can be. So I go there and I look there until I satisfy that and I realize the illusion of that, and then I come back.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we have to meet the crushing disappointment and disillusionment in that. I mean, I totally had that for a relatively short time, mercifully, but I very much bought into the idea of that concept of enlightenment.
Mhm.
And there's a line in the book where I talk about that idea of enlightenment as being tailor-made for perfectionists with low
Yes,
self-esteem.
that's right. Right.
It's like, the perfect counter to that sense of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see why a lot of us fall into that particular trap, and
Completely.
there's so many traps riddled along the way that my ego is, oh, that right there's the answer. Yeah, until you exhaust it, until you exhaust all of those means and all of that. You just have spent all your money on the spiritual marketplace. You've talked to every guru, you've gone all the places, and then you realize that the only way to yourself is through yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're exhausted from that, aren't we? I mean, all the options have been exhausted and we're left exhausted by that. My sense was that the the going through came because there were no other avenues left.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was the same for you, that the staying with ourselves and going through ourselves. We've been rendered so exhausted, we've got no ability to do anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got no ability to really think about that or reach out of that for anything else. And it feels like the last possible place that we want to be, isn't it? And in a sense, it is the last possible place we want to be.
Yeah, it is. It is. In the book, you say, from the book, you say, this is from chapter 2 in Falling, you say, as I descended into this realm, I felt as if I were teetering on a gangplank, about to fall to my death. I could not go back to the way I had come because my former life and my former self no longer existed. The only option seemed to be an unavoidable plummet over the vertiginously high edge, a horrendous, catastrophic smash that I couldn't possibly survive. It felt as if I must hold on with every fiber of my being to avoid being annihilated or obliterated. And in a way, this was true. The persona I had become and tried to perfect over the years was indeed falling apart. Because I didn't fully know that I existed beyond this false persona, I naturally feared my imminent demise. I clung desperately to the sheer cliff face, fingers bleeding, attempting to claw my way back to the supposed safety of the mountaintop. The impossibility of simultaneously holding on and letting go created an unbearable tension throughout my system. I felt trapped between equal and opposite forces. I could not yet fall, but holding on was not a viable option either. Holy crap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is part of what we experience in the dark night, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, did you have your version of that?
Yes. Yeah, my dark night experience was just kind of a disassociation with reality for 6 months. I mean, I was just completely non-functional, and and I don't know if there was a lot of leading up to it. It was just kind of like falling off a cliff. It just become, and I noticed in yours, it seems there was a lot of like, I'm going to do this, I'm going, but no, I'm not ready. I don't, and kind of hedging and coming back, and then sort of for me, and it was just like, I'm walking and I went right off the cliff. I
Right.
didn't really have a lot of, thinking about it. I just kind of went off and over the edge, in my experience. But one of the things that you talk about in the book, and I really appreciate this, is talking about the fact that our awakening, our dark night experiences are not linear, and they're not going to be the same. And in the beginning, you say this may give the appearance of a linear experience with a beginning, middle, and end of awakening experiences of a dark night experience. But the reality, you say, is more complex. This journey does seem to have an arc with distinct phases, yet it is also elliptical and rhythmical rather than strictly linear. I found myself coming back to the same places repeatedly. And I felt that too. It's so iterative. So I wonder if you can
Yes.
talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to say first, there's something, and I talk about this in more detail in the book, there's something in retrospect uncannily beautiful about the way each person's dark night occurs. It's almost as if we have our own tailor-made version. And obviously it doesn't feel uncannily beautiful at the time at all.
Mm-hmm.
But but as I say, in retrospect, there's something really quite amazing about it. And for some people, there's more of a, external life carries on more similarly. For other people, it's like you described, just off the edge, complete falling apart, everything gone. And I think one of the things that I saw in the dark night, and I've seen repeatedly since, is really the impossibility of comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we as humans, we have this tendency to presume that because it happens like this for me, that's how it happens. That's everybody's experience. And I think it's so important to say, no, that's not how it is. Um, I think there's something about coming to honor the individual nature of our own experiences is incredibly powerful, and we can see that within that there's an archetypal movement happening.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And yet that comes to and through each of us in a completely different way.
Mm-hmm.
We're also very used to thinking in linear terms, aren't we? We're very used to cause and effect, and what would happen for me is that I would think like, oh wow, here's some movement, and there'd be maybe a few couple of hours or a few days of being someplace else in some way, and then it would be back back into to whatever was coming next. And for a while I really thought that was because I was doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I just did what X, Y, or Z person told me to do, then I wouldn't be in this suffering. And I came to see that really, to use a good British word, that was bollocks. You
Mhm.
know, it really doesn't work like that.
Mhm.
So yes, I think understanding that it does, definitely there is some shape to it in some way, isn't there? But there's no neatness in that,
Yes.
because it's so much more raw and visceral than anything that we could sort of package up.
That's right. That's what, to me, it makes, this type of awakening experience so, just so real and honest, because nobody can walk the labyrinth of Jen but Jen. Nobody can do that. Nobody can package that up and sell it to me. That belongs to me. That journey is mine. And until I own that and started to trust that this experience is mine. I mean, I can look around and I can, and this is the beauty and genius of your book, is it gives us templates. We have examples, we have testimony, we have people who can affirm our experience, but nobody's dark night of the soul experience is going to be exactly like anybody else's. And to me, that's just, there's so much freedom and beauty in that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's something that I've heard quite a lot from people who are reading it, is exactly that it gives their experience permission.
Yes.
And I think really, as we move into what feels like a new paradigm in, well, a new paradigm generally in the world, but certainly within spirituality and awakening, I think really the most powerful thing that we can do together is share, isn't it? It is sharing that testimony from a place of understanding that no one is deeper or more or better or any of that stuff than anybody else. And I
Right.
think to encourage, and I mean that literally, to give each other courage to be wherever we are in our labyrinth in the moment. We see a lot still of people trying to talk each other out of their experience in some way. What I call this sort of the yes but.
Yeah.
People being met with, yeah, I know you're suffering, but blah blah
Yeah.
blah. It's like
Yeah.
that has to, I think that really has to stop, because underneath that there's something so much more profound, so much more compassionate, and so much more honest.
Yes. Yes. And when we meet each other with that yes, but when we're unable to meet each other where we are, typically in my experience, when I'm doing that, it's because I'm meeting people as an image. I'm not meeting them as they are. I'm meeting them from an image in my mind to an image in their mind. And then I've just created an objectified mess in which we're not actually even communicating. We're just two images who have hijacked the true self's experience and are now sort of like hosts inside, having experiences with each other that never actually contact with each other in any real way.
Exactly. Yeah, that's beautifully put.
Yeah.
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 I want to kind of move forward towards the middle of the book. And one of the things I really deeply appreciate is your focus and attention on sort of the critical theory side of spirituality and how that's often overlooked or looked past, meaning, before I say that, one of the things that I noticed in what you said were sort of common elements of the dark night experience: lack of sleep, unable to eat, needing to prioritize our time, the falling away of conditioning, a desire to withdraw, appreciating self-honesty, the desire for death, an atonement for self-betrayal. These are all themes that you bring forward. And one of the themes that you bring forward is withdrawing from the matrix of oppression. And I about just peed myself with joy when I read, because so many spiritual orientations seem to disassociate from the actual living reality that we're actually in as earthbound humans. And here you write, the shadow is not merely an individual phenomenon. The long and intertwined shadows cast by patriarchy, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism include the full array of oppression, prejudice, and violence of all kinds, including environmental degradation, war, and rape. Whatever the particular intersection at which we personally stand, we all live under these shadows, whether we benefit from them, are disenfranchised by them, or both. During the dark night, we are called to withdraw from this matrix. And I just like, I mean, I get chills because, you know, why is it that is it spiritual bypassing? What is it that there's so many spiritual orientations that seem to totally disassociate from the reality that we're all living in, as you know, as within our social reality, you know, and how we interact, as you know. And a lot of us seem to just say, well, we're all one, and then we sort of just whitewash all of the experiences that we're having on the ground that are really painful and traumatic. And so I want you to talk about, you know, how you see that withdrawal from the matrix of oppression and how that ties into the dark night.
Yeah. Just to say, I think whitewash is a particularly accurate word. I think there's something about the way that what we might call, you know, modern spirituality or New Age spirituality has brought certain ideas to get together with a certain type of capitalism. And if we look at certain aspects of that, like the focus on abundance, or the individualizing of all of that, you know, that you can have whatever you want if you just do the right sort of work or you think in the right sort of way, fits very neatly with what we're being told by capitalism, doesn't it? And all the other structures that we live by. You know, I walked past a shop in town the other day, and on the in big letters on the window, and this was you know, a chain clothing store. In big letters it said, "Stand out, fit in." And I stood stunned, like looking at it for about 10 seconds going, wow, sometimes they just state it really boldly. It's like there's the two opposing strands that the all kinds of markets present us with, isn't it? Fit in and stand out. You know, like with all this sort of inherent dilemmas that within that arise within the individual.
There are so many like little oppressions. You know, there's the larger arcs of oppressions that we name, that we deal with, you know, every day: racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. These are the oppressions that we can name and identify, but aren't there just 1,000 little tiny oppressions existing in how we treat ourselves, in what's acceptable? When we go into a spiritual store and everything in there is saying, if you buy this, you'll have the perfect spiritual experience, and yet the lady behind the counter is in tears because her boyfriend just broke up with her. And there's all of these mixed messages of that don't, there's so much that doesn't jibe. And aren't those also very subtle forms of oppression that we are unpacking in this work of looking inside of ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately one of the biggest factors in that, I think, and this obviously, as we know, this goes back centuries, is really the split between mind and body.
Yeah.
You know, that we've lived under the shadow of that split for such a long time, and obviously then there's there's all the different things that happen depending on what kind of body we are. So obviously the different experience of bodies of color, or disabled bodies, or gay and lesbian bodies, and so on. And I think whenever we perpetuate that split, we do damage on some level. That might be damage to somebody else, it might be damage to ourselves in some way. And I think the dark night makes it, I think, less and less possible to split ourselves from our physical, visceral experience. You know, I think sometimes one of the things that I tried to get across in the book is that this is not a matter of thought. You know, and I think spirituality gets very caught up in, you know, change your thoughts, change your life, or change your thoughts, your body will be fine. And for me, there's a huge no to that. That completely misses the point, I think. That
Yes.
having to come into the body because it's howling, because the body is ablaze or dissolving or whatever is going on in that time. And as we know, there's like an alchemical process that goes on which has these very elemental movements to it. We can't get away from it. We can't get away from the fact that we are a body, that we're in this body, and it's not taking no for an answer. It's not taking being denied for an answer.
Mhm.
And you know, there's a point in the book where I talk about the no, the meeting the no, which
Yes.
feels like it is held deeply in the body, and it is saying no to all of that
Yeah.
in all the ways that that individual body needs to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. The no that arises through trauma that leads us around. You write about that. You say, alongside the no and its accompanying rage, we discover our deepest wounding, which commonly includes abandonment, loss, and rejection. The adapted self formed in response to and around this wounding. During the dark night, the raw energy of the initial wounding arises incessantly. Despite our resistance to meeting it, we eventually have no choice. It often has the energy of a frightened, ashamed, grief-stricken child. It is the part of us that has never been met, seen, or loved. We have spent our lives trying to avoid it. It needs to be met as tenderly as possible, to be seen, heard, acknowledged. This wound, which has unconsciously run our lives for so long, seems to permeate our nervous systems.
Yeah.
How do we go into our nervous system to meet our trauma?
Yeah, that's that's a very big question, isn't it? And I think, you know, one of the things that I was very clear on with this book is that there would be no methodology in it, because I don't think it's possible to do justice to what's required in the dark night by describing any one particular methodology, which
Mm-hmm.
is not to say that tools and techniques and methodologies aren't useful at points, you know, but I think more pertinently, we're feeling into how to come into the wounding in our nervous system, like moment by moment, when we're in the dark night. You know, really, as I say somewhere else, it's about it's really an apprenticeship in becoming present to ourselves and coming into that. And that might mean different things on different days. You know,
Yes.
one moment that could be, you know, lying flat on the floor for, you know, an hour and not moving. Another day it could be walking. Some of the time it could be, you know, moving much more vigorously, or dancing, or, I mean, anything.
Yeah.
um, and I think to come into the nervous system, to the wounding, is it can only be done on its own terms, and it has within it this deep intelligence that we slowly begin to connect with, that it knows what it needs. You know, it knows what it needs moment by moment. If we start to connect with it in a way that enables us to hear that, which I think is inevitable at some point in the dark night, even if that's, you know, we do that imperfectly and we might lose touch with it for days at a time. You know, this is not about doing something right. We start to hear ourselves in that deeper way. There's something um, that starts to enable us to build the capacity to be with it more. and the more we're able to be with it, the more that capacity develops. So it becomes, in a way, sort of a circular thing. And I think there's something also, you know, I use this term adapted self in the book, and right at the beginning I talk about, you know, I don't use any phrase to do with the self or the ego in any sort of pejorative way. You know, the adapted self is a feat of immense ingenuity and intelligence, and it formed, as you quoted it, it formed in order that we survived the wounding. So it's not a matter of, you know, trying to push it aside or any of that stuff. It's about listening to it as well as the wounding, because it also has important things to say about how we do that. Oh, it just lost your sound, Jen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to say that it's been my experience that when I was a young child, I had cancer, and I had a tremendous amount of physical and psychological trauma around that cancer. And a lot of my dark night experience was going into that trauma, intentionally walking into that labyrinth of myself, and meeting all of those. And I did this very spontaneously. I didn't have anybody who was telling me what to do. This was all being led by my, what I refer to as my inner guru, that light that knows where you need to go. And that if you listen, you'll go in the right places. And so as I started walking this labyrinth of myself and literally meeting the Jenny of that place, and coming to meet that girl and holding her hand and saying, and at the time I was, my awakening experience happened with trees, and the trees had given me a sacred cord of presence that I didn't know myself. I didn't know my own presence, but I was holding on to a sacred cord by a community of trees that I was working with in my dark night experience. And so I carried this sacred cord into myself and met each one of those little girls that was deeply wounded, and said, we're okay. We're here. Everything's going to be okay. And let me bring you this presence. And as I started to do that alchemy of resolution, it started to, resolve a lot of that trauma that existed in my nervous system. And over a period of time, I turned inside out and became aware of my mind and thoughts and thinking and identities and images in a way that I was not aware of. But even before that, but even still, even now, 7 years after that awakening experience and that deep purging of trauma that happened, even now, my nervous system clutches to an inner tension that always exists 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I don't think it'll ever leave me, because it's so impregnated into my nervous system. And I have learned to love that too. And not thinking that there's some great, beautiful resolution that's going to happen where I'm free and everything's going to be amazing forever, because that's not my experience. It's so messy, and it's still messy. And my nervous system is still deeply wounded, though I am now conscious of it. Yeah.
Oh, amen to all of that. Absolutely. I mean, that's also really similar to my experience. And I think it's actually quite hard to shake the idea that we'll end up somewhere, doesn't it? That's such a pervasive idea and ideal, isn't it? That there's this sort of fabulous ending. And that's also not my experience. There's often a grip in the nervous system and tensions and stuff and all the rest of it. What I saw, though, through the dark night, is that the presence of those things isn't isn't the issue.
Mm-hmm. That's
You know, the presence of those things doesn't mean what I thought it used to mean.
That's right. It used to grip me and it was, oh, I'm a bad, what is wrong with me? Now it's, oh, that's interesting. Well,
Yes,
an observer,
exactly.
as opposed to being drug around by all of those feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think when we start to become curious about what's there, that's when things get really interesting, isn't it? As we're talking, I can remember when I was in the dark night for a shortish period. I went to see a psychotherapist who was quite helpful, and I had some understanding of where I was at. I had to get 2 buses to get there, which was quite a big deal for me at the time. And I can remember once being on the bus and feeling the anxiety coming back, which was huge. And I had tons of anxiety in the dark night, and I'd had lots of it before that. And being gripped in that way, like, oh my God, the anxiety's back. Shit, am I going to be able to get there? What, like, I'm so wounded. This is really awful. What am I going to do? And then I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I can't remember what it was now. It might have been an animal by the side of the road or something, and kind of went, oh, that's interesting. And caught that moment where I forgot the anxiety temporarily.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was the beginning of seeing what you just described. It was possible to go, okay, there are feelings, yeah, there are thoughts, there are images, and I just noticed that too. You know, that deer or whatever it was.
Isn't it amazing that we go until we, have that experience, we go our whole lives, chasing the images until suddenly.
I just lost you for a moment. Hopefully you'll come back. Yeah, I'll pick up
Imagine
where
now where I am believing what I used to believe.
we just missed you for a moment there, Jen. Do you want to just backtrack that last
Yeah.
sentence?
Oh, so sorry. No, I was just saying that I I have to give myself a lot of I have to give myself a pass because I spent a lot of time in my life chasing those images and those feelings and attaching myself to them. And it just wasn't until I had that moment of realizing that that thought, that feeling, that image is not me. That is not who I am. That is something that is happening and coming through me, but that is not who I am. But until I had that moment of awakening, I just didn't know. I was just living beholden to every single thing that came through my mind. And that is an exhausting way to live.
Absolutely. I mean, I think paradoxically then, in my experience, what happens is that we're actually able to feel things fully for the first time, because I think I was so convinced I was that, and so terrified of almost like that would be proven. You know, I mean, one of my big things, as I talk about in the book, was it's all my fault. And I think there was such a deep conviction of that I was constantly engaged in trying to disprove that, like, oh, it's not my fault. That the idea of moving towards the feelings was terrifying, because to actually feel them would somehow prove that what they seem to be asserting, if that makes sense. So I think it's there's a great Sandra Maitrey quote where she says, paradoxically, immersing ourselves in what we feel is disidentifying. We think we imagine it will be even more identifying with what we're trying to disidentify from, but in fact it works the other way around, doesn't it? I think when we see on some deeper level, or we start to have an inkling that we're not our thoughts or feelings or beliefs, that enables us to feel everything, see everything much more deeply.
Yes. I have said frequently that I don't think I ever truly loved until I had that awakening, until I went through that dark night, only because I was loving from an image to an image. Everything. Everybody, myself included. Animals, our earth home, my mother, my lovers, all of them. I was engaging from an image to an image. And then suddenly when all of that broke down and fell apart and I saw the illusion of it all, suddenly it wasn't the images having my experience. The images were not hijacking my experiences anymore. I was having my experience. And oh God, I remember just the bliss of experiencing and touching and love myself for the first time. Well, the first time since I was a young child to know myself in that way. It was overwhelming. It was a homecoming. I mean, it's beyond, I mean, you do such a beautiful job at describing it. And I just want to read this here. Let's see. We were talking about the importance of honesty with yourself. As I acclimated to being with myself in this way, I came to appreciate the crucial importance of honesty. There's a deep integrity to this kind of honesty, a sense of being real that comes as a profound relief. It's not about attempting to tailor our experience to what we believe it should be, nor is it the spin of the persona trying to keep its narrative intact. What is actually here, what is real in this moment, we discover a desire to become intimate with the realness of the moment. I mean, I don't know if I ever felt the realness of the moment until I went through the dark night.
Yeah, I mean, me too. Maybe very fleetingly here and there, but very little. My sense is that there's something in us that knows that if we're really in the intimacy of the moment, we're done for in some way. Like when we start to touch into that, the unraveling is inevitable, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it brings up all kinds. It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's something about that honesty that takes us from complication to simplicity in some way. I mean, it's a deeply unflattering kind of honesty in a way, isn't it? Because it pays no heed to however intellectual we think we are or however great we think we are. You know, it's irrespective of all of those notions, isn't it?
Well, there's no images to hide behind anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's a dangerous way to live, especially in a world that is saturated in individualism, right?
Yeah.
It is really dangerous. And yet I really believe that those of us who are going through the dark night experience right now and awakening to these larger connections to ourselves and to the world are, we're caps on a wave of something that's happening for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to say that this is, in some mysterious way, some of us find ourselves on those waves, don't we? And I think I have no idea how or who or how that comes about. All I know is that it does come about, and that I'm profoundly grateful for that, and that it is absolutely a collective wave.
Yes.
You know, that this has nothing to do with any sort of notion of personal achievement. I mean, it's a constant source of amusement to me that had somebody said to me 12 years ago, you'll end up doing what you do and writing 2 books, I would have completely misunderstood how that could possibly come about.
Super ego Fiona would have received that totally different than this Fiona.
Utterly, totally misunderstanding the point of how that happens.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I want to read this as we're getting close on time for our hour
Sure.
here. I want to finish up because this is just so just mind blowing. In the glow of the dark night's embers, I began to revel in living itself, in the sheer aliveness of life. How had I missed this for so long, this incredible, beautiful, heartbreaking, sorry, funny aliveness? How could I not put, oh my God, at the end of every sentence, every sight, every sound? Yet I had pretended to ignore the magnificence and the mystery. I had the chutzpah to pretend I knew what was going on when in reality I didn't have the slightest idea. When I finally admitted that, life became richer, deeper, fuller. My cup ran over. Having been cautious, held back, trouble avoiding, safety craving, I now wanted to hurl myself at life with reckless abandon, to dive into the mire and the mess, wild, crazed, bloody, dirty, disheveled, and fucked up. No more holding back. No more mincing words. Winds are not meek, and rain does not attempt to be less wet. Frost spares nothing, and the sun does not dim its own brightness. I was finally willing to be hurt, scarred, pierced, or burnt to ash over and over again. I was finally willing to live. I just want to thank you for putting words to what I think, so many of us are going through, and for being so generous in sharing all of the iterations. And I feel in this book, you're this gnashing that is happening, this great awakening in you that you're sharing so freely. And it's a gift to us as a collective, because it normalizes our experiences. And I'm just super grateful, Fiona. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, should we invite everybody else?
All right, let's have a meal. We set the table, now we eat.
I like that some people are actually eating. That's great.
Perfect.
Oh, I'll stop the recording now too.
Thank you.